How are you doing? My name's Dan. This is my channel, Mindful Missionary. I started this channel about a year and a half ago when I moved my family from the US to the West African country of Sierra Leone to teach the gospel. This is part 2 in a mini series of videos that I'm producing regarding the topic of teaching Christ cross-culturally. And so for those of us who have chosen to leave our home and our own culture to walk into a different country, a different culture, one vital step that I talked about in the first video that I'll link down below is that we need to think about how to present the gospel to different cultures. The gospel stays the same, the message is the same, but perhaps how we communicate and present that gospel is going to alter depending upon the culture that we're in. And so in this video, I want to share just 5 steps or 5 tips that you can take when you arrive into a brand new culture to learn that culture so that then you can adapt your communication of the gospel to fit and to be best received from those you're teaching. Before we jump into tip number 1, I just want to share that this is simply my own experience. I'm sure there are books and other resources out there that have much more to say. However, the things that I'm going to share have been incredibly helpful to me, and I think could be very easily applied to other lesser developed countries that you would move to for the purpose of teaching the gospel. The first thing I would share, tip number 1, is just stop talking. Stop trying to be the center of attention. When a white Westerner especially enters a country like Sierra Leone or like an under or lesser developed country, it just naturally happens that that foreigner becomes the center of attention, all right? And it can feel in some ways like very instinctively nice to have everyone focus on me and ask me questions and want to know my thoughts and want to learn about me. But that is not an environment that's very conducive to me learning about other people and me learning the culture of the people that I'm around. And so it's going to feel a little bit backwards, but shut up. Try to become small, try to shift the focus, try to shift the attention from yourself and just sit back, become small, find a place in the background and just observe. Tip number 2 is to learn the language. Now, there's a couple of different reasons why I think this is incredibly important. Number 1, asking someone to explain their culture to you, but requiring them to use a language that is not native to them is like asking me to cross a river without a boat. Yeah, it's possible, but it's so much harder. And so if you can learn the language, then that then allows someone to be able to explain their culture using their own native language. That's going to just open so many doors and make it so much easier for you to learn. The second reason why I think learning the language is important to learning the culture is that when you learn a language, you not only learn how to communicate, but in some ways you learn how the people that speak that language think. And so I'll share like a few examples of this that I've come across as I've learned one of the local native languages of Sierra Leone, which is Creole. Number 1, there is not a natural way for asking how old someone is in Creole. And I've discovered that because in English, at least in the US, it's a very common question to ask how old someone is. In Sierra Leone, that's not a common something. In fact, sometimes it's an inappropriate something or an impolite something because a lot of folks do not know how old they are. It's actually pretty common for there to be people that don't have their birth certificates, don't have anything that records how old they are, and so it's kind of a topic that you generally stay away from. But the language that you're speaking kind of clues you into that. Similarly, the strongest word of affection in Creole is lek. Okay? I lek you, which is basically the translation of I like you. In English, we have so many words to express affection. I love you, I cherish you, I adore you, I'm so fond of you. And we could probably go on with tons because we are very expressive regarding our affections. In Creole and in Sierra Leone, there are not a plethora of words to express affection. Now, I think affection is expressed in different ways, but regarding the verbal expression of affection, the language itself indicates that the culture is not a very verbally affectionate culture. And that's something that the language is able to clue you in on. Pretty interesting. Tip number 3, sometimes you can learn more from observing than asking. And what I mean by that is in Sierra Leone, and I think in perhaps many underdeveloped countries, there is not a diverse population, meaning the majority of people in Bo, where I live, are all Sierra Leoneans. They're not used to interacting with foreigners. Therefore, they're not as familiar with what is unique about their own culture. So if you were to ask a normal Sierra Leonean, like, what's special about your culture? Well, they don't really have a great natural idea for what distinguishes their culture from other cultures because they've not really interacted with many people of different cultures. And so sometimes asking someone, tell me about your culture, is not going to produce maybe the most helpful responses. Because perhaps the things that are most special or unique about a culture is something that maybe the locals think, well, is true in every culture. And so they maybe wouldn't share that with you. And so don't just ask questions, but also remember to observe. So the next tip, tip number 4, and this is a little bit wordy, I don't really know how to explain it in an abbreviated way, is to avoid Western-influenced institutions. Okay, and let me explain what I mean by that, because that probably does not make any sense whatsoever. I think a natural inclination, and what seemed kind of intuitive to me, as I want to know, how can I adjust my teaching style to best suit the people of Sierra Leone? One of my thoughts was, let's go to a school and observe how the local teachers would teach people in Sierra Leone. The problem with that, as I observed, is a lot of the institutions like hospitals, schools, and even churches, they have been heavily influenced by Westerners. Okay, a lot of these schools are funded or founded by European or American either churches or organizations or nonprofits or whatever, which means a lot of the curriculum and the training that they've received in the organization that they adopt is from a more Western standpoint. And so for that reason, it's obviously not bad to consider those things, but sometimes going into some of those institutions, you'll actually adopt more Western styles of teaching and communication and things like that versus what might have happened organically if those institutions were more indigenous to the native culture. And there's so many more maybe tips and bits of advice that I could share, but one more that I'll share. So number 5 is instead of asking people to come into your environment to talk to you about their culture, go into theirs. And this might seem like totally obvious, but people are going to be so much more at ease and at home in both talking about their culture and also exhibiting and demonstrating their culture when you walk into their environment instead of requiring them to come into yours. And so this means if you're serious about learning a culture, don't just ask people to come to you, invite them over to your place. Instead, walk over to their place, go into their environment, and I think that'll be a much more expedited process of educating you regarding the local culture. Like I said before, there are other resources and others that have more experience in this area. However, these are just things that have been really helpful to me and things that I would just want to pass along to anyone who is seeking to go through a similar process and sees the value of adapting their communication of the gospel to adjust to the culture that they're teaching in. And so thank you so much for listening. I'm really eager and excited to produce more videos in this kind of mini series on this like really important topic. Thanks so much again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.